The day the first graveyard was converted into a cloud farm, people brought lawn chairs and thermoses as though attending a county fair. They watched hydraulic cranes pull marble angels from the ground and replace them with slender aluminum spires that bent toward the sky like cattails over a pond. Atop each spire, a silver chrysalis resembling a soap bubble quivered in the breeze, waiting to capture the next rising soul. Somewhere beyond the gawkers and news vans stood Mira Torres, gripping a clipboard and a humidity sensor, noticing how the wind made a sound she had never heard. Not a whistle, not a moan, but a layered murmur like hundreds of overlapping whispers. It was, she suspected, the sound of the newly dead being taught to speak in vapor. For most people, the Reclamation Act of 2063 was an elegant solution to two problems. Cemeteries had become unmanageable islands of land in swelling cities, and freshwater shortages were worse every year. If the departed could return as rain, said the ads, they would nurture the living one final time, closing the loop that nature itself once closed before humans dammed rivers and carved aqueducts across whole continents. The tech was simple, or so the public was told. Micro-seeding a body with aerosolytic bacteria that metabolized flesh into gaseous compounds and rode capillaries of warm air upward where the chrysalis towers captured them. The hushed truth was less tidy. The dead did rise, but not as neutral vapor. They carried memory, desire, and occasionally anger. Mira knew that better than anyone because she was both a meteorologist and, unofficially, a translator. From childhood, she had heard moods unspool inside thunderheads. Her grandmother's laughter in a spring drizzle, the solemn bass of her father's voice rumbling through midsummer cumulonimbus. She kept this talent quiet until the government's aerobiology authority learned of it, then hired her to conduct atmospheric diplomacy. If water was now a second afterlife, someone had to negotiate with it. For 3 years, her assignments were minor disputes. A grizzle over Cleveland refused to disperse until the city orchestra played a requiem the clouds demanded. A stubborn fog in Manila insisted on floating above a high school graduation so the pupils could feel their ancestors' pride. Usually, conversation with the sky ended in gentle compromise. But in early October, satellite scans showed a cyclonic mass spiraling above the Midwest Luzon, too organized and seeded with spectral signatures. The press named it Vespera. Mira recognized the root, from Latin vesper, evening prayer. A storm that prayed was troubling. A storm that prayed in plural? That was worse. She flew to Iowa in a plastic-skinned prop plane whose wings shimmered with condensation even before takeoff. 10,000 feet below, the ground-level moisture looked like a timid quilt. But higher up, mirror layers rotated in opposite directions, a sure sign of poltergeist turbulence. Her headset vibrated as the authorities' director spoke. "Local cloud farms have lost control," he said. "We need to know what they want." Mira glanced out the window. From the plane rose the once quiet All Saints necropolis, converted 6 months prior. Its chrysalis towers still gleamed, but the tops had ruptured. Plumes poured out of them, twisting together like braid strands. Someone inside that storm was howling. In Des Moines, she commandeered a Doppler truck and drove toward the cloud farm, the windshield rattling under fists of rain that occasionally turned to pellets of hail. At the perimeter fence, she met Harold Beck, the farm superintendent, whose poncho flapped like a broken sail. He tried to shout over the wind. The containment membranes reached saturation. Pressure shot past design thresholds. We evacuated staff, but 3 technicians stayed behind. Haven't heard from them. He pointed to handheld LiDAR readouts. Energy spikes shaped like heartbeat graphs. In older days, storms forming over warm ocean water could gather power to Category 5. This storm gathered consciousness. Mira climbed a scaffold attached to the tallest tower and clipped on a harness. She carried the usual instruments, a hydrometer, a radio transceiver, a palm-sized projector loaded with hymns, lullabies, and apologies she might need to broadcast. But she also carried a tin locket filled with her grandmother's bone ash, because nothing opened negotiation like a personal introduction. At 200 feet, the air tasted metallic, and droplets slid along the scaffold bars against gravity, crawling upward like salmon returning to spawn. She tapped her throat mic. "This is Mira Torres. I seek parley." Static answered, then a chorus of overlapping voices. Male, female, young, old, rasped in a dialect of water. She closed her eyes, letting the pattern resolve itself into syllables she understood. "We are not clouds," the chorus said. "We are unfinished prayers." "Tell me what was left unfinished," she asked. "Reunion," the storm replied. "Reckoning." Lightning cracked so near that every hair on her arm stood. She steadied her breath. The tradition held that most souls, once distilled into vapor, found peace in nourishing crops and rivers. Those who did not were usually bound by unresolved earthly ties. The All Saints Conversion Project had included multiple military cemeteries. With wars only half forgotten, some spirits in those graves had likely wanted vindication or at least recognition. Yet the word her translator filters emphasized now was none of those. It was disavowed. "We hear you," Mira said aloud. "But your winds endanger the living. Will you let me serve as witness?" The clouds churned as if consulting among themselves. Then, "Climb higher." She unclipped and scrambled to the crow's nest platform, where the original chrysalis dome had ripped free. There, threads of vapor snaked around her, weaving a translucent fabric. Inside that fabric she saw what they saw, memories projected like backlit film. Trenches soaked in mustard gas. Burn wards. Unmarked mass graves designated as temporary, and later, city councils voting to relocate cemeteries to make room for luxury condos. The transition to rain had been marketed as an honor, but to the occupants it felt like eviction. One spectral voice separated from the rest, clearer, a baritone that might once have led a choir. "We were promised release," it said. "Instead we became infrastructure. Pipes." Mira could not deny it. She had written op-eds praising the sustainability of cloud farming. She had posted cheerful infographics. Your granddad could water next season's strawberries. Now she confronted the raw indignation behind a policy she had helped legitimize. Below, Harold's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Pressure sensors redlining. If kinetic energy exceeds 50 petajoules, Vespera will mesh with jet stream shear and head for Chicago. Millions are downwind. What do they want?" Time, she thought, and maybe contrition. But to articulate that on radio would sound like mysticism. "I'm working on it," she told him. The storm's baritone spoke again. "Give us their words, the ones who used us, their tongues. Let them confess." Mira's heart sank. They wanted government officials on air, admitting culpability, perhaps erasure. She reached for a compromise. "I can't summon every policymaker, but I can carry your testimony to them. Meanwhile, will you consent to disperse into rainfall? Rain nourishes the living. It honors the cycle." "Honor," echoed hundreds of voices, but their tone curled like smoke through chimneys, skeptical. "You would dilute us." A downdraft shoved her against the rail. She pictured the technicians still trapped in the maze of catwalks and utility tunnels. She pictured Chicago's skyline, glass towers like tuning forks ready to shatter under gale force. She pictured her own grandmother's ash inside the locket, waiting for her to choose a side. "Wait," she said. "There is another path. I know a place where words are archived untouched, not by governments but by weather itself. The Upper Tropospheric Library. You could inscribe yourselves there." The library was more concept than building, a band of air between 9 and 11 kilometers where supercooled droplets formed fragile hexagonal plates. Scientists had found those plates often bore microscopic etchings, electrostatic scribbles left by previous storms. Mira had studied them, even deciphered fragments. She believed the dead might record their stories there, forever orbiting the planet in quiet ice, read by anyone with the right lens. It offered patience rather than oblivion. Silence coursed through the cyclone. Then the chorus asked, "Show us." At that, Mira unclasped her locket. A swirl of iridescent dust rose into the current. "Abuela, ayúdame," she whispered. "Help me." The ash particles ascended, catching on eddies, and began to glow with St. Elmo's fire. Ionized filaments traced glyphs in midair, Mira's family names, lullabies, recipes, a living demonstration. memory held in vapor, visible and honored. The storm trembled, no longer roaring but raining softly within itself. Voices tapered to a single question. Will they read us? I will teach them, she vowed. But you must rise higher. Freeze where the library waits. Release the pressure. Do not strike the city. Negotiation, by tradition, ended with a seal. Mira offered hers. She unclipped her harness and stood free on the slick platform, arms raised, trusting the spirits to cradle her. Updrafts cinched around her torso like invisible ribbons, lifting her 2-3 meters until her boots hovered, a covenant made literal. In that levitated hush, she felt the storm redirect its fury upward. From the monitoring station, Harold's voice exhaled in disbelief. Barometric drop reversing. Wind shear dissolving. Mira landed, fingers numb, knees buckling. She reattached her harness, climbed down to ground level, and found the rain had gentled to a curtain of silver threads. Each drop carried latent heat and data, the storm writing itself into binary pulses the authorities' instruments recorded, not vengeful now, but earnest, insistent upon being legible. For 36 hours, the newly minted library storm ascended. Commercial flights rerouted, satellites trained cameras. In laboratory freezers, researchers caught ice plates and magnified them. They saw etchings, dense as hieroglyphic scrolls, accounts of battles, of lost lovers, of bureaucratic indignities, of names erased from headstones by lichens. The public reacted first with awe, then with unease. Talk shows asked whether humanity had violated a sacred margin by engineering souls into precipitation. Politicians pledged panels and inquiries. Some called Mira hero, others called her dangerous mystic. She accepted neither label. She was the barometer who registered grief and converted it into a forecast. Weeks later, she returned to All Saints Cloud Farm, now cordoned off for redesign. Harold met her beside an excavator idle like a repentant beast. Containment protocols will include consent checkpoints, he said. No more automatic extraction. Families will choose if conversion happens. Mira nodded, but kept her gaze on the empty chrysalis sockets. She understood consent as a beginning, not a solution. The dead had taught her that memory seeks its own altitude, beyond whatever architecture the living devise. That evening, she climbed a hill north of the farm to watch the sunset. High above, the library glimmered a pale belt of jeweled ice flickering with encoded laments. She turned on a handheld laser projector and aimed a narrow beam toward the belt, modulating it in Morse to spell a greeting, gracias. Between flashes, she heard faint replies, syllables falling like delicate rain across her ears. Some were new, testimonies of those 3 technicians who had died but chosen to join the library rather than haunt the soil. Others were older, refugees from drought-stricken potter's fields halfway across the globe. Their voices overlapped, yet did not blur. Each held timbre like individual raindrops pattering on canvas. Mira listened until the hill was dark. Then she whispered another promise she would spend years fulfilling. Your words will be taught in schools, in weather bulletins, in lullabies. Thunder will no longer be mere noise. It will be lecture hall. Rain will be textbook. When she finally descended the hill, her boots left little crescent prints that filled with dew. Above her, the cloud farm lay quiet, machinery powered down. But the sky was alive with biographies, and the meteorologist who loved it understood that every future forecast would be written in 2 languages, temperature and testimony. She returned to her hotel, drafted a communiqué to the World Meteorological Congress, proposing a new standard bulletin, precipitation probability, wind speed, and narrative density. She predicted resistance. She welcomed it, because diplomacy with the dead was no longer optional. It was weather. 2 months later, the first International Archive expedition launched weather balloons into the library's band. The balloons returned with ice plates etched so intricately that computers crashed attempting to decode them. Human linguists, historians, and poets took over, piecing together cross-temporal dialogues. A 1918 infantryman speaking to a 2045 hospital nurse. A 1970 civil rights activist debating strategy with a 2101 climate refugee. Classroom teachers built curriculums around these dialogues. Children filled notebooks not with copied dates but with rainfall samples they melted in Petri dishes, reading the dissolved glyphs through microscopes. Skeptics argued the system could be gamed. What stopped a living conspiracy theorist from faking messages, seeding ashes with propaganda? Mira replied that even false clouds leave a chemical signature distinguishable from the metabolized remains of bodies. Authenticity could be verified, but privately, she understood that history itself was always a contested sky. Her job was not to guarantee purity, only conversation. In spring, the Midwest blossomed unprecedentedly. Nutrient analysis showed the rainwater richer in nitrates, yet balanced, as though the library, mindful of its second vocation as irrigation, curated its own chemistry. Farmers reported corn stalks that creaked like rustling papers. Some swear they heard the stalks speak their names during twilight irrigation. Scientists dismissed that as pareidolia. Mira did not. She visited one such field at dusk. As sprinklers hissed, she placed an anemometer among the rows. Wind brushed the leaves. Through the machine's resonant cavity, she heard a soft choir repeating her grandmother's lullaby. Altered, yes, but melodic, as if the corn itself rehearsed folklore. She realized then she had underestimated the dead again. They sought not merely to be read, but to be remixed, to become new culture carried on wind-blown pollen and children's skipping rope songs. The authority rebranded as the Atmospheric Memory Ministry. Mira was offered directorship but declined. She preferred field work, the messy edge where cumulonimbus anvils brewed, and policy had no foothold yet. Standing atop towers, she continued to negotiate. A Moroccan sirocco mourning desertification. A Norwegian snow squall celebrating a fisherman's centennial. A Brisbane thunderhead furious about offshore drilling. Some deals she brokered, some she merely witnessed, all she archived. On the anniversary of Vespera's birth, Chicago held a commemorative ceremony. Church bells rang, then paused so the crowd could hear what followed. A scheduled drizzle whose droplets carried microvibrations calibrated to reproduce the speech pattern of the baritone that first addressed Mira. The voice boomed gently over umbrellas. "We are not hostage, we are heritage." The crowd, thousands strong, stood silent, perhaps unsure whether to cheer. Mira stepped onto the dais. "To those unsure what to do," she said into the mayor's microphone, "remember funerals. When rain fell and felt like blessing, that was them, practicing. Respond the same way you did then. Lift your face, let them touch you." Umbrellas lowered, people tipped their heads back, raindrops struck cheeks like affectionate taps. Some tasted salt, some sweetness, traces of minerals, memories, tears. A reporter asked Mira whether this crossover between weather and storytelling risked emotional manipulation. She answered, "So did cave paintings, novels, and cinema. The sky is only the newest screen." Later that night, she sat alone on a bench by Lake Michigan. The library shimmered overhead, such a faint corona that city lights barely acknowledged it. She opened her notebook, wrote a line, tore the page, folded it into a paper plane. The wind off the lake caught it. Minutes later, a drizzle returned, and she felt one drop linger on her wrist longer than physics allowed. It slid into her pulse as if reading it, then moved on toward the city lights. The forecast for dawn promised clear skies, but she knew clear no longer meant empty. It meant the narratives overhead had chosen silence for a while, the way readers close a book not because the story ends, but because they intend to dream about it. She rose, walked back toward her hotel, leaving footprints that slowly refilled with starlight-flecked dewdrops. Footprints the wind would read by morning, then carry upward into limitless stacks of cloud-bound books that would forever call themselves